You see, there are consequences to your choices. You are free to choose, but there are consequences. And when you choose good, you become a slave of good. When you choose evil, you become a captive to the very thing you chose. So freedom is a wonderful value, a wonderful virtue, but freedom comes with responsibility. Are you here this afternoon? Amen. Freedom comes with responsibility. And the abuse of freedom, when you use freedom irresponsibly, you are abusing freedom. The abuse of freedom can lead to the death of freedom. So Adam abused freedom and became a slave to evil. And today you see the same principle at work. People abusing freedom, becoming a slave of the thing they choose. So for instance, those who use the freedom of choice to choose to use drugs often become slaves to the drugs that they were free to choose. And so they experience by their abuse of freedom the death of freedom, and now he is no longer free. She is no longer free to stop. Because even though it's destroying him or her, it has such a hold, has such a grip, has such a control of their will and their emotions that even though they know it's killing them, they're not able to walk away from it. The abuse of freedom has led to the death of freedom. Freedom is a value and a virtue we must prize. We must hold it up and esteem it because our God does. But let's never forget that with freedom comes responsibility, and the abuse of freedom will lead to the death of freedom, and you can create and place yourself into greater bondage than you ever would have imagined in your exercise of freedom if you do not use it responsibly. And unfortunately, we have come to a time in the history of the United States when many of our fellow citizens, in the name of freedom, are abusing freedom. And without knowing it, they are contributing to the death of freedom in America, and unless things are reversed, to the decline of this great nation. In the name of freedom, they're rejecting God. Don't mention his name in the public square anymore. Don't mention God in schools. Don't mention God in court. Don't mention God on the public square. Take God, put God in a corner, keep him in your house, keep him in your room, but don't bring him out. Rejecting God, and of course, rejecting Jesus even more. The one who says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. No one can come unto the Father except by me. They're rejecting him in the name of freedom. They're rejecting God's standards, rejecting the boundaries which God wisely established for our benefit, rejecting the distinction God has made between male and female. For the good of humanity, they're rejecting that. Rejecting God's standard of biblical marriage, and now well, you know. And once you start rejecting those standards, my brother and sister, there's a slippery slope. You see, when there are no absolutes, when the only rule now that should guide us is whatever is right in your own eye, then anything and everything becomes permissible. Then there's no longer a standard of right and wrong. And so there's a slippery slope that unfortunately America right now is on. Rejecting the Bible, rejecting the boundaries that God wisely established for our benefit to ensure that we're able to continue to enjoy the freedoms that God himself prizes so much. America has unfortunately become today much like Israel was in the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Everyone got to decide what was right in their eyes. No authority, no standard that we all agree. We don't have to submit to any absolute authority. For as far as we're concerned, there is none. And the only authority is the authority that rests in our own will and our own choices. America, that's the new definition now that seems to be acceptable to a growing number of people. Let everybody do what's right in their own eyes. You have no right to tell me what's right. That approach to freedom really misunderstands the nature and the purpose of freedom. Amen? Freedom was never given to us, and freedom cannot be maintained in an environment where everyone does what's right in his or her own eyes. Freedom cannot be maintained in an environment where God's boundaries are rejected. The boundaries are necessary for freedom to thrive. When you do away with the boundaries, freedom begins to die. Let me illustrate that. Take, for example, the river. That free, fast, flowing river. The only reason that river is free, the only reason that river can flow, the only reason that river can be the river is because that river has boundaries, which God wisely established on both sides of the river. It is the presence of the boundaries that allow the river to be free to flow. The boundaries are essential for the river to be the river. The boundaries are essential for the river to flow and to be free. If you were to remove the boundaries, the water in the river would simply spread out, spread thin, stop flowing. The river would die without the boundaries and become a slimy cesspool. So God wisely places the boundaries on the left and the right, which the river respects. And as long as the river respects those boundaries, it's free to be the river it was created to be. Boundaries were put there not to restrain the river. Boundaries were put there so the river could be what God created to be. So I hope you can see then that boundaries are necessary. And God gives boundaries to us, not to take away freedom, but to provide the conditions under which we can truly be free. Free to be who he created us to be. Free to be men and women created in his image. That's what's happening in the nation. The boundaries are being removed. And the new rule now that defines freedom is let everyone choose what's right in his or her eyes. And you have no right, not even God has a right, to determine what are the absolutes, what are the boundaries that all of us together must respect in order to continue to be free.